to Latino Game Changers. I'm Javier of Jaguar Games, and joining me today is
Rosie.
Welcome, Rosie, and welcome from all over the world. So, we believe our crazy plan as Jaguar Games is that games can be better if we tell better stories. And for better stories, you need fresh characters, fresh settings. So, Latinos are, I believe, an opportunity. Today, I'm chatting with Rosie about how potentially we can actually get these better stories. What can Latinos in particular provide in contrast with, fortunately, so many other stories that are already being told, so many other teams. So for you, Rosie, first, I believe that we can always chat about what brought you into the games industry. Because Latinos, fortunately, we can do so many other things. I always get the question, Javier, why are not you a torero? Which is an interesting story.
Why games? For me personally, I wanted to join the gaming industry because growing up, I played the Game Boy, Nintendo, PlayStation, every gaming console you can imagine. I was playing it and I loved it. And as I grew up and I started thinking about what I wanted to do, where I saw myself in the future, I thought it would be amazing to just follow my dreams and do something that I love and that I'm extremely passionate about, but also kind of, in a way, promote Latino and Latino culture, just because it was something that I didn't see a lot when I was growing up, and I felt misrepresented or not represented at all. And I thought that joining Jaguar Games, which is a company that is huge on emphasizing Latinos and the culture and the history and everything about it that makes it beautiful, and sharing it with everyone, and giving Latinos a place to feel seen and heard, I thought that would be the perfect mix for me. So
it's super interesting to hear this because representation, it's fairly new, especially on the game industry and on the player side, as a term that players are actively looking for. So I have to tell you, there are lots of people here in Mexico, where we're currently having our call, that do not necessarily think about that concept, that it's not one of their priorities. I believe that something very special about Latinos, like I'm hearing with you, is that it is important for you. I'm not sure if you started playing somewhere different from Mexico, probably, where representation is fortunately part of what people are looking for. Is that what happened?
Yeah, so I was born in Los Angeles, California, to immigrant parents from Mexico y El Salvador. And mostly the games that we would play there, you wouldn't really see Latino characters, or if you did, it was just one role, but it was kind of stereotypical. So it kind of pushes you to want to see more representation and kind of play games that you see yourself kind of relate to.
Interesting, fascinating, because well, I mentioned to you that this is not, sadly, a priority for, especially, let's say, millennials and probably older players. They're still not looking for representation as that much of a priority, at least here in Mexico. Probably, fortunately, younger audiences do care about this. I believe that part of the difference is that, curiously, there was an exclusive game for the Mexican market where Latinos were very well depicted, and that I believe didn't reach the US. And that game was from the Super Nintendo, the SNES, and was Chavez. So that was one of the probably the second or third video game that I played. And in that game, naturally, it is a boxing game. And the final boss is Julio Cesar Chavez, one of the best boxers of all time. So in contrast with probably other games where the Latino would be either the sidekick or something else, here was the opposite. Here it was, you could create your own fighter, and all the way you were training in order to face Julio Cesar Chavez, who was the best fighter of all time. And I know that was an interesting local collaboration here. You could even see some local stores like in the background. It was, for me, something normal because it was one of the very first games that I played. But now looking back, and like I heard from you, sadly, this was the exception. I mean, aside from that game, there are like 20 years of not good representation of Latinos in games, probably. And we absolutely need to raise in order to fill that gap. So in order to do that, I believe that we can only create as interesting content as naturally the demands of players, but also the interest of developers. This doesn't happen, games don't happen in a void, like in a vacuum. You don't just create a standalone build in the engine and boom, the perfect game comes out. It's actually a collaboration between everyone. So in that sense, are there particular developers or areas inside game development that are particularly interesting for you? Fortunately, we can do so many things inside game development. Are there fields that are particularly interesting for you?
Well, that's a super loaded question for me, especially because I don't know why, but I have this thing where I want to be like the jack of all trades. I want to do everything and anything that I can. I just want to learn everything. I want to do audio. I want to do game design. I want to do even community management. I just think that the world of game development and gaming is it's so fun to me, and I feel really passionate about it that I just want everything about it around me. So, but I guess for the sake of the question, I think that mostly I think I'm super interested in, I want to say maybe game design, just because I think it's so fun, just thinking of ideas of how to get other players to have fun, or like levels and everything like that, and then finally see it come to life, and players kind of get stumped, or people talking about, oh, you can get through the level like this and this, and it's kind of beautiful in a way because you create community, you create communication. So I think game design is super fun.
Oh wow, game design. Okay, so this is community exclusive, because even though I'm the director of our studio, Rosie had mentioned that as we heard, she has other interests. So this is the first time that I'm hearing that she's also interested in game design. And this is the way to go. I mean, while we have talked that our industry sadly pushes us towards a specialization, this narrow focus, because we invest our hours into it, that allows us to use tools ever in a more efficient way, in a more practical way. At the same time, I always compare our industry to the Renaissance. So in the Renaissance, you would have artists who would be very skilled, sometimes in painting, and at the same time creating a helicopter, like on a sketch. Leonardo DiCaprio would be doing that. And I believe, in part, that was possible then, and this is possible now, because there was so much low-hanging fruit. For the first time in the Renaissance, and now here, new people could work in the arts, in even creating new products. That usually was not the case. In the Renaissance, there were these patrons. So you would have noble families that would be competing against each other, supporting their preferred artists and showing off, hey, I have Michelangelo, hey, I have Leonardo da Vinci. And here, I believe very, very similarly, there are these very interesting tools. We all know that there's this potential, but what may be missing is for people to use these tools, these capabilities, this excitement of their players in more ambitious ways, in new directions. Because we always hear, like, once a year, there's a World War II game. Like, practically every year. At minimum, there would be one. And let's not talk about movies. That's probably more aggressive. But how often do we hear suddenly that there's a new Latino game, or that there's a new game set in a new African context, in a new Southeastern, South Asian context? Tragically, in order to get that kind of content, we need developers to have on the first, as a first step, the bravery, this ambition to actually pursue this interest. That will always be risky, because again, like I mentioned, we are pushed towards being very focused on our fields, and also as a company, we are very pushed to being the very best at World War II FPS for mobile, with microtransactions, something so narrow, so very well packaged. And in order to actually break new grounds, well, I believe it starts with the people. So in terms of that, I wonder if anything were possible, Rosie, based on this interest that you mentioned, that fortunately you have on game design and better representation, what would you love to see in games in the next 4 years? Like, if anything were possible, what do you think is the major untapped potential of our industry that you'd love to see finally achieved?
Well, kind of backtracking on what you said about there not being that many games about being set in Eastern Asian countries or Africa or Latino countries, well, Latin countries. I think there have been, but
It's
for
growing,
some
right?
reason, yeah, but they're not very like well received, or you don't really hear about them as much. There's not a lot of hype around them. And I think in the next couple of years in gaming, because just recently there's a Latino superhero, and it's I think Blue Beetle. And how long has it taken for us to see, you know, a Latino superhero? And it's 2023. It's just now happening. So I think games still has a little.
To which one are you referring, just so that everyone is in context? To which hero?
What do you mean?
You were mentioning that there's now this Latino superhero. So which, what's his name?
Blue Beetle from DC. And so that's, like I said, just now happening. And we've had the whole Marvel universe and everything, but we're just now having Latinos. So I think gaming is probably going to take a little bit of more work and time to get there. I would love to see like a game that's solely based in like un pueblito in Mexico, or you know, you're living in Mexico City or in Colombia or Brazil, and you're the main character and you're Latino and you're surrounded by Latinos. And I think that would be amazing. I haven't seen a game like that where it's purely the protagonist is of Latin descent, or the whole cast is Latin descent. So I think that would be an amazing route, or like way to go.
Absolutely. So in this sense, and I know that there are some very good games that fortunately are depicting this, let's say, more personal contexts, like a pueblito in Mexico City. But like you mentioned, there's the problem that potentially there's not enough hype. We can also call it there's not enough marketing. Our industry, sadly, requires a lot of marketing. There was this myth in not only games, but in technology in general: build it and they will come. Like, the game, if it's good enough, people will flock to it. And I've met so many developers that are so talented who continue working in that way. And I mean, it's a good problem to have. There are so many good games that special ones like that may not break through the noise. So this is why we have to celebrate when people are actually trying to break into these new grounds, by these conversations, for example, by whenever I spot a team who is looking for something, recruiting or whatever, I really try to help them, because I know that, I don't know if it was your case, but at least on mine, there's not that much help in the Latino culture for games. It is something very new. And on the contrary, I believe that we have to even learn from some of the other contexts. For example, I have noticed that at GDC, there were these huge pavilions for the usual players. Like, there was a pavilion for France, there was a pavilion for Switzerland, but there were also from countries that you wouldn't expect and that I celebrate, like Uruguay. So Uruguay is a smaller country than Mexico, and they had their very cool pavilion. And they were the ones, fortunately, helping me, because this is the cool thing about this kind of shows. Like, we don't have sponsors, or we don't have the powers that be. We can call the things as they are. There's no support from, let's say, the Mexican government or the OEA or any official organization, like none. It's something that and many Latinos know, it's something that fortunately every developer is looking for themselves. We kind of help each other. There's no official organization that yet really tries to look for us. But again, I believe that by talking about this is that how gradually we actually fix those problems, identify those problems. So going back to the kind of change that you'd love to see in the industry, Rosie, and what you mentioned previously, on game design, on better representation, is there a particular kind of change that you'd love to see?
I think particularly I want to see more, I'm not trying to be exactly just, how do you say, like preferring a certain country or anything like that, but I want to see more companies and games that are coming out of Latino countries. I want to see more video game companies in Mexico and El Salvador and Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Honduras, because I think when I was looking around for positions, since I was living here in Mexico, I wanted to kind of start my career here, and it was really hard. I could not find, if any, studios here in Mexico, just alone here. I can't imagine if it's more harder in some of the Central American countries, but here I can only find Jaguar Games, and I think we need more companies, more people making games from here that are developers from here. I want to see hype for games that are coming out of Latino countries. I want to see that love and that support from Latinos alike. So
absolutely. So in this sense, it really resonates with me, naturally, as a founder of our game startup, that we need more studios. We need more studios here in Mexico, and fortunately in every Latino country, because we can provide this fresh content, these new settings, these new characters with so much of our fascinating culture. So I always invite people to, while thinking about the big picture, about our greater vision, the benefit that we want to see, because only that way we can actually be very specific about the tactics that we need in order to get there. So I know that fortunately, in order to get more game companies here, we need to address the main obstacle, the main challenge. And on my end, what I have seen at GDC, at other events, reading constantly on the industry, is early stage funding. Because if we read, fortunately, reports on actual entrepreneurs, Mexico, just to start, there's so many entrepreneurs. Like, it's so natural for us. You don't have a job, you're actively looking for it. We don't have any government support. So it is natural for us for a long time that you will start your tiendita, you will do whatever you need. And in the case of studios, I know that there are a lot of game studios, but sadly, they don't survive for a long time. Again, because there's no government support, but there's not enough investors who actually understand video games, who understand the early stage. I have been on Shark Tank, for example, and people were like, okay, so I understand that you're starting a game studio, so this is not a joke, I need to have a signature of your hardware supplier to tell me that you're not colluding with him, that he's not your uncle or your brother. Yeah, as ridiculous as like, and I'm like, I am buying computers from the Microsoft store. So you're asking me that you need a signed letter from the CEO of Microsoft. I had to ask for that in order to get funding in Mexico. It's ridiculous. Can you imagine that? Yeah,
that's insane.
I should frame.
Why does that matter?
I should frame that request. It was so ridiculous because tragically, here in Mexico, we are still with pre-industrial thinking in terms of investment, in terms of the kind of companies. So you are thinking about condos department, like farms, like physical things, and software. Inherently, it's a different thing. Like, there are so many big companies who are still not making a buck. And that's another conversation. All companies have to be healthy, have to actually provide something valuable. If investors here heard about, for example, tragically, how companies like Bungie started, that at the very beginning, when Halo was starting, they were just believing that their game would work not on Xbox, but on the Mac platform. And that they only managed to survive because Microsoft, without having a weird relative like Latinos sometimes think, that Microsoft got to them and said, here's some money if you switch over to this new thing, this new risky thing called Xbox. No sales, not anything that investors request here. This is just a bet, but release Bungie this weird, strange new IP called Halo to my platform exclusively, betray Apple and Steve Jobs. You can look for the video. It's amazing how Steve Jobs originally presented Halo before it was released for consumers as a tech demo. And that's how our industry is made. You need people who actually make bets, aggressive bets for things that are not obvious in the beginning. But that kind of, let's say, adventure, thrill betting, well, we do have it as developers and founders of companies. We don't have it yet, sadly, on the funding side, on the investment side, like I mentioned. It is just until now, I believe, that not only talent is gradually being international, like a company can be here and the talent can be some other place, and fortunately we can work together. But the investment is gradually going international too. This is something that we still need to fix for Latinos. Many times I know, even though people don't like it, that just by being Latino, people don't invest in it, which sucks, but that's reality. And I could do it like some of my colleagues do in the US, like just say, I'm offended and this is not just, or I could just understand it. And in contrast, try to work with the people that I see on the investment side that fortunately are making bets on us, on Latinos. I am still looking for them, by the way. If you, Rosie, know any of like that, please tell me about them, but just joking. I mean, the game industry is constantly like that, I believe. People looking for that particular other, like you're in the airport, for example, and while there may be a lot of people when you arrive to your destination with like signs and everything, there's only one, right, that will have your name. That's constantly the vibe when you're applying for a job, when you're recruiting, when you're looking for funding. So we need to bridge that gap, I believe, with these kinds of contents and conversations so that we discover each other. So with this, maybe we can wrap up this initial conversation. It's been very interesting to hear from you, Rosie, the kind of exciting potential that we can have with Latino Game Changers. And we're very happy at Jaguar Games to push for this to actually happen in our lifetimes, not in 200 years. So see you around. Cheers. Salud.
Thank you. Cheers.